Do you feel that in a time when we are more connected than ever, we are drifting away from real human connection, especially to ourselves? I do. Hi, I'm Leticia Latino, and I want to invite you to join me and my very inspiring guests in exploring ways to reconnect to your essence, to your definite purpose, to what makes you tick. Are you ready? Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of Back to Basics, Reconnecting to the Essence of You. Today, we are honored to have Martin Dugard. He's a #1 New York Times best-selling author, renowned for his compelling narrative books. Martin has co-authored an acclaimed killing series, including titles like Killing Lincoln, Killing Kennedy, and Killing Jesus, which have captivated readers with their vivid storytelling. Beyond this, his solo works, such as Into Africa and The Explorers, showcase his talent for bringing historical adventures to life. With a background in endurance sports journalism and a passion for exploration, Martin offers unique insights into the human spirit and historical events. I'm so excited to delve into his journey, his writing process, and the stories behind his best-selling books. Hello, Martin, and welcome to Back to Basics.
Good morning, and thanks for the great intro. That was pretty nice.
Well, I love it. I have to say that thank God after almost 300 episodes, it used to be that I struggled for guests. And now, I get PR people, great PR people promoting. And when I saw who you were, and I'm like, I've read these books. This one is easy. I normally have to read the book before the interview. This one was like a nice surprise. So I'm very excited and very honored.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Appreciate that.
Yeah. And then, back to basics, what I like is to explore. Since you're an explorer, it's like our journeys from our early years, what we're passionate about, and how in each guest story, whatever they were passionate the younger version of themselves, find a way to trickle into what they eventually do to be fulfilled in life, not as a job, but whatever they need to do to really feel fulfilled, which in my case is this podcast. Inspiring stories makes me tick. So that's why this podcast exists. So tell us, Martin, were you an explorer from very young? A little bit of your origin story, please.
Oh, sure. No, I was an explorer. I read about explorers when I still, my parents still have copies of the books I read when I was 5 and 6 years old. I tended to read books about explorers. I mean, it kind of rubbed off. And when I was about 6, I went to my mom and I said, Mom, I want to be a writer. And she said, don't be silly. Writers don't make any money. So I kind of set that aside for 20 years. And then only after I'd finished college and gotten a corporate job that I really hated, did I give writing a try. And here I am 30 years later.
That's incredible because what was your mom? And that's fine because as parents, we want our kids to thrive, right? So it's just the normal thing to say, like, I wanted to be a lawyer, and my dad say they don't make any money. I was raised in Venezuela, right? So now I tell him every time I have to pay my lawyer's bill, I'm like, look. But does she ever tell you anything now that you're, such an accomplished writer, like saying, well, maybe I delayed you 20 years?
Like you said, she was just trying to be protective, and she has since passed, but she was very proud of me, and she was the one when I first began writing. I went by my nickname Marty, so it'd be Marty Dugard, and she saw my byline that first time, and the one thing she said to me, she goes, I really took pride in choosing your name. Would you mind just using your full name in print? So it's been Martin ever since. Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful. That's, I have to say, very nice. So you got into, you studied journalism. Is that what you went in terms of college? Can you expand a little bit on the corporate aspect of your journey?
Yeah, no, I never took a journalism class. I only took one English class. I was a political science major. And what happened was I got out of school and I got married. And then I got this corporate job, and you kind of think when you're in college, and everybody talks about they're going to get out, they're going to get a job, and there's supposed to be a progression to life. You get the job, you work at the company, you get promoted, and you make a career out of it. And within a week of this new job, and I was in this cubicle, and I was bored stiff, And I kept coming home and I told my wife, I said, I'm not happy. And she
Mhm.
finally, after months of this, she said, just do something about it. And of all things, I went to see a career counselor and I paid this woman $350, which at the time was just a fortune. And,
Mhm.
and my wife and I had no money at the time. And this woman, gave me all these tests. And I came back a week later to get the results of the test. And what she said was, have you ever thought about being a writer? And that's that thing I told my mom I wanted to do, 20 years earlier. And
Mhm.
so that's how I got going. And so I kept my corporate job. I still needed the work, but I began writing on the side, doing magazine articles, mostly about, running and triathlon, just because that's what I was into at the time. And,
Mhm.
over time, it got to the point where um, my corporate job and my writing were kind of on the same path. I was making as much money from both of them. And one of them had
Mhm.
to go. And I'll never forget, I got a call one day out of the blue from this guy, and his name was Mark Burnett. He's the guy who does Survivor and The Apprentice and all those things. But back then, he was just struggling and starting out himself. But he was taking a team of athletes to Madagascar to compete in a 2-week adventure race. And
Mhm.
he had convinced the organizers to pay for a journalist to accompany the team. And he called me out of the blue. I'd never met him before. So I had to go to my boss and say, I need 3 weeks off to go to Madagascar, literally halfway around the world from my home. And they gave me the time off, and I had a blast. It was just so much fun. And then on the whole flight home was like, how do I ever go back to the corporate world? How do I go back to that cubicle? And I should not have worried about it because they fired me my first day back. And
No, really.
but I was thrilled. And I went home, told my wife, it's like, hey, I get fired today. I was very happy about it.
Well, the universe took care of it. I heard somewhere that sometimes when those things happen, it's because you should have done it a little bit earlier, and
Yes,
probably that was the
I agree.
universe just giving
Yep,
you the nudge to
I
do
agree
it.
with that.
So that's fascinating. A couple of things that catch my attention, which is your mom knew best. Like she saw the superpower, like you saw it, or you saw it also very young, but people knew that you were good at writing. Then we push it aside, even if she gave you the advice at that point. But then vocational exploration. Like sometimes we feel that it's not worth it. People working with coaches or somebody that just helps you uncover what you really maybe should focus on. And I mean the fact that you did this, say you did that investment and say I'm just gonna try to uncover this, fascinated, and then you started doing the work, which if you hadn't done it in parallel, probably he would have never found you to invite you on that trip. Like I think this is where people sometimes maybe fall short. They don't start moving in that direction, and then it can never happen.
I completely agree with that. He called me because he had read an article I'd written. He thought I'd be the perfect guy to cover this event. Then he cold called me. And, I had no idea who he was. And I even told my wife, I said, I'm not really sure this guy is legit, but I checked him out and he turned out to be a great guy. And, later on, when they were looking for someone to write a book on the first season of Survivor, they called me the week before production began and asked if I would travel to Borneo and be on the island and write a book about it. And I told him, I said, I need a plane ticket by Monday and I need a check by Monday. And both
Mhm.
those things arrived by FedEx and I was on my way to Borneo.
Oh my God, fascinating story. And that's like they meet it. So where you get fired, now you say, I'm doing this full time, which I imagine is nerve-wracking because now you kind of maybe be intentional about what to write about. Did you go into that process of now what and what kind of books do I want to write, or that kind of came organically eventually because you've written so many. I mean, I fall short in your introduction, but everything will be in the show notes. But you've written so many books that
Yeah.
are incredible.
Well, you know what? I've got a new one coming out May 20th. It's called Taking Midway. It's about the Battle of Midway. That's my newest. And I'm looking around. I've got two stacks of books here. I've got one to my immediate right, which is the books I've written on my own. Then I've got a bunch to my immediate left are the ones I've written with other people or for other people. And
Mhm.
so I did the number of work somewhere about mid 30s right now. So that's a bunch of books. But what happened was when I left the corporate world, first of all, there's a sense of panic because, all of a sudden you don't have a paycheck anymore. You don't have insurance. Um, my wife worked at the time, but then we made the decision for her not to work because we were going to have another child and we couldn't afford daycare for two of them. So, I was going to be the sole earner. And again, income, insurance, all those little things that go with it. And so I just hustled and I wasn't doing books yet. I was still doing magazines. And I got into the writing world at a time through a career path that doesn't exist anymore because we really don't have print magazines. I mean, they exist, but for the most part, we get our content online. And
Mhm.
so I don't even know how you make a living doing that. But what I would do, I'd do an article I would juggle, 8 magazine assignments at the same time. And some I get $2 a word, sometimes I get $1 a word, some I got a quarter a word. And I had them all going, but I was traveling a lot. I mean, I mean, I'm not complaining. I mean, I literally saw the world and, between 1993 when I left the corporate world to about 1998. But then as my kids got older, we had a third child. I couldn't be gone 3 months out of the year. So I made the decision to write a book. And it's the first, and I wrote it on spec, and which means that I didn't have a publisher. My plan was to write it and then send it to potential agents and publishers. And I got rejected 21 times. I still have some of the rejection letters. And then finally, one company took a shot on me, and then I've been writing books ever since.
I appreciate your journey so much because it really is such a clear example of a lot of things. I was honored to have Seth Godin on the show, and I'm a big fan of his as well. And he's a big proponent of, practicing and doing it and just keep doing it because you never know. Like most people, when they venture into something new, they want to know, well, what's the end goal? How am I going to get there? But sometimes we forget the path and the journey is so different. It's never like if you want to trace your steps, probably it's hard because it's so many people and introductions and rejections and all
Yeah.
these other things that it's almost like a soup. I call it the soup. And then the soup is delicious because you put a little bit of every ingredient you could handle. And and so in your journey so far, it has so many aspects of that. So that's incredible.
Well, first of all, I'm a big fan of Seth. I think he's amazing. But it's funny when I first became a writer. I mean, like very first when I first began trying to see what it'd be like, um, I was terrified of rejection. Like a no was a personal insult, and then you realize after a while that no is just part of the game, and it's not personal. It's maybe you wrote something that is not what they're looking for or not the style that you'd like to have. So you know, even now when and we're dealing with the publisher and we have a disagreement or there's, they're not, we're not on the same page about, what I want to write. I don't take it personally. It's just business and it's all, and the creative process is a business process. And a lot of people forget that. I mean, it's fun to write in a journal. It's fun to write, in a setting that is very intense and emotional. But at the end of the day, if you're going to make money at this, it has to be a business as well.
Absolutely, yeah. It's that's a great point. I think that we like to think about the aspirational aspect of writing, but at the end of the day, we have to feed our family. Writers have to feed their families.
Exactly.
They have to, you know, that's great. And so, of course, you read. So, which one, like, would you say that first book you wrote? Which one was it? Like, what's that stepping stone for the authoring career?
Well, I kind of fudged it a little bit because what gave me the courage to write that book was I had gotten a call from Sports Illustrated magazine a couple years earlier, and they asked me to write a children's book. So it really wasn't a, what we think of as like a book, a 300-page book length book.
Hmm. Hmm.
It was maybe 40 pages, but it was the first time I'd written in a long form, setting. And I pulled it off and it made me think I could write a little bit longer. And then I got a call from another company. And again, this is the business part. They wanted me to write a book about inline skating. And I knew nothing at all about inline skating, but I wrote them a book. And then I, a certain point where I thought, you know what, I can do this. So the book wrote was originally titled Just Once, and then they changed it to Surviving the Toughest Race on Earth because it was about a big adventure competition in Patagonia that I did.
Mm.
So it was a first person book. It was very personal. But after that book is when I began writing primarily narrative nonfiction or history.
Yeah, and I find it fascinating because you really kind of take historic figures, historic facts, and really make it into very compelling. I mean, I admit it. I mean, when I saw the title of your book, and I'm not sure it's Killing Jesus, but that was like the third one. It wasn't the first one on the series.
The third one, Kennedy, it went Lincoln, Kennedy, then Jesus. I'll tell you what, that's a tough book to write
Yes,
because
but that's
you
yeah.
gotta you've got to go through, first of all, the Gospels themselves are historical documents, and you have to kind of you have to really immerse yourself in those. But then there's a whole field of history known as the historical Jesus, and it just doesn't deal with the faith aspect. It deals with what it was like to live in Israel at that time. What was Jerusalem like? What were the Romans like? What was crucifixion like? Crucifixion
Mhm.
practiced throughout the Middle East. And then when you kind of start burying yourself into this and you learn what it's how people don't die on the cross from being crucified. They die from they can't breathe. After a while, they just can't support themselves. So it's that kind of history like that, really digging into the research. It transports you to another place. But when I write history, I took a couple of history classes in college, and every time I'd read the textbook, I'd fall asleep because it was so boring. And when I began writing history, I thought, I don't want to write history that puts people to sleep. I want it to read like a thriller, like it's a spy
Mhm.
novel or a crime novel. And so I write, it's history. It's 100% factual, but I write it in a way that's fast paced. It's moving. I want my job was to keep people turning the pages.
Well, and I can tell you, became from, I'm a Catholic. And so when, you see that title, I'm not the kind of Catholic that say, I found it intriguing. I find it provocative. And I'm like, let me give it a chance. And honestly, I really enjoyed it. I think one of the things that stuck with me, and I think I'm pretty sure it's in that book, that nobody ever has questioned if Jesus existed, right? Like when you have all these faiths, and even if you don't read the gospel or whatever, him as a figure, it's very inspirational. And some people call it the first influencer of the world, just as a figure. And it's true. You still talk about it. So what was kudos on the courage, because I can only imagine to write a book about Jesus. I mean, all the historic figures, but that one in particular is just takes courage. And I read it and I enjoyed it very much. So thank you for that.
It was
Um, Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was wondering if there was, I mean, I'm sure there were surprising things you discover or uncover. Is there anyone in particular, just because we're talking about that particular book, that stuck with you or that you were surprised and like to share about?
What really stuck with me is Herod, King Herod, the one who wanted to kill all the infants after Christ was born, or Jesus. Remember, he wasn't Christ until afterwards. He was born Jesus. Herod wanted to kill all the infants. Herod, what really stuck with me was I always imagined him as this ruling authority figure. And in fact, he was an older man. He was very debauched. He had sores on his feet, so it was almost impossible for him to walk. He was very heavy. And you think of this kind of lunatic figure, and then to get that visual description, it's always stayed with me. So whenever comes Easter time, and there's always something on TV about Herod, and you've got Charlton Heston playing Herod or somebody like that. It wasn't like that. It was a very um, kind of a delusional individual, and when you can take a historical figure like a Jesus or a Herod or a Pontius Pilate, and you can actually give them the qualities that we associate with, just daily life, it doesn't just humanize them, it makes them kind of rise up off the page a little bit. So you're not reading about somebody from history, you're reading about a real person who existed.
Mm, fascinating. Yeah, you want me to? I mean, there's so many books. I admit it. I mean, you're a very prolific author in doing the research about you. And also, I like how you have been able to create series around your titles, because I know you have the Killing series, but you also have the one about, taking Paris? Is it taking like the different places? Is more around World War II?
Yeah, yeah, the Taking series. So obviously the Killing came first, and Killing was a little bit. It was great because it's kind of in your face. Killing is killing, so
Mhm.
they get your attention right away. Taking, I wanted to do. My agent was joking. We could have used the F word instead of taking the effing, but
Yeah.
I don't think that would have gone over as well. But I wanted to do a series of World War II books just because it's a time that I know of, but as an historian, I wanted to know more. I wanted to know more detail, go in depth into some of the things, and I was going to start with Taking Rome, but then I went to Paris just because I like there's a romance to Paris that kind of pulls you in, and I wanted to know more about it. And quite frankly, when you research a book, you have to go to the location. So I wanted a very good excuse to go to Paris.
Wow, that sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
But I think people are fascinated with Second World War. So here's an offer. My parents are from the town in Sicily from where the Americans invaded.
Oh
And
wow.
my dad, who thank God is still alive at 91, he was born in 1934. So he has some fascinating stories about that time. And that's why we'll be at taking Sicily, because that's that's really where verbally they signed the Treaty of Peace. And so I just think it's an amazing idea because there are a lot of World War II, let's say, people that are curious about how it all unfolded. So it's very interesting.
It's fun. Well, like this new one I've got, Taking Midway. I didn't really I did the first three books were at the war in Europe, and I wanted to do something about the Pacific, and I had never written naval history. And the one thing about when you write about a battle on land, you have everybody is an individual. In other words, if you have a soldier who is doing something courageous, you can tell that story of that individual, but they're still part of this bigger fight. Well, there really were very few individuals who really stood out in the Midway story because it was actually more about the ships themselves. So I had to find a
Mm,
way to make ships romantic, and you care about the ships and the people on the ships and the things they did. And
mm,
a completely different way of writing history, but at the same time, it was creatively, it was a great challenge.
mm. Wow. It's really fun stuff. Then you have defined yourself as an explorer, and then it's not surprising that you did an explorer series. But what I love, I mean, if you can share about that, is that you really, when I was doing the research, I couldn't picture you as, like one of those movies, Indiana Jones. Like you really, like go and explore. Like you get yourself into these faraway places. I know you did the murder of King Tut, and you went explore Egypt. So can you talk about that part of immersing yourself in the places and exploring the places you're going to write about?
Oh, sure. I mean, that's flat out the most fun thing ever. Is what I'll typically do, and with the Explorer series, I literally would choose a book based on the places I wanted to go. Like when I wrote about Captain Cook, I'd never been to Australia, so he discovered Australia, and so of course I had to go to Australia. Then I went to a lot of the other places he went, including Kealakekua Bay in off on the Big Island of Hawaii, or no, is it Oahu? No, yeah. Anyway, on the Big Island of Hawaii, which is where he died, and so I swam through the way because I was trying to figure out why he had a hard time getting ashore. Then I realized at the bottom of there was not sandy, it was rocky and it was slick. And so when he was attacked by the natives and he tried to, get back to his ship, he couldn't he couldn't get away. So, you gotta kind of put yourself in their footsteps. So what I like to do is I research everything before I go. And so I know what I'm seeing, I know what I'm looking at, I know where events happened. So, for instance, when I did Into Africa, one of the reasons I wanted to go to Africa is I had never seen a lion in the wild. It just seemed like something I wanted to see. So, I went to Tanzania. I saw my lion, and then 2 days later, I was traveling with a couple buddies on that trip. We got arrested and held for 3 days in the town of
Oh my,
Summerwood,
holy.
and just stuff like that goes with it, and good story. When I did King Tut, if you go to the Valley of Kings, where all the tombs of the kings are, there are a lot of tourists. It's very hot. There are a lot of small biting flies. And some of the tombs are very big. Like Ramses is like a small apartment. I mean, like with several rooms and stuff like that. Tut's is very, very small. And there's a gate blocking entrance because he's the most popular. And my wife and I had explored a number of tombs before we got around to Tut, but they had closed the gate for lunch. And so all these tourists were standing in the shade. They had a little shade canopy. By this time, my wife was fed up with the biting flies and the heat, and so she literally went to the guy guarding the tomb, and she gave him the equivalent. In Egyptian money, it was quite a bit. In American money, it was just a few dollars. He opened the gate for us while everybody else is in the shade. We got to go in and have the whole tomb to ourselves, and Tut is still in there. Tut is
Oh,
mummified. He's in the tomb. So we had Tut to ourselves for about 15 minutes, explored the tomb, and then the lunch break ended. Then all the tourists started heading in just as we were heading out. So that was a lot of
oh
fun.
wow. Great. Well, your wife sounds like quite the partner for this adventure. So I think she probably is happy that your corporate job transitioned into a writing job.
You know what? When I was working in the corporate world, I remember one of the turning points was I was going to lunch, and everybody went to lunch at the same time. It was 11:45 to 12:30 was lunch. And most people would go take the escalator down to the cafeteria. And, at the time I was 25 years old, and I heard all these people talking about what they were going to do when they retired. And they were in their late 50s, early 60s. And that was like a death sentence to me. It was like, I didn't want to wait 40 years to start living my life. And that was a real great motivator for me to get out of and not do the corporate thing.
Mm. Yeah, I totally agree. I had somebody in on the podcast at some point talking about the importance of defining your lifestyle and envisioning your lifestyle and what kind of life you want to live, and then try to combine those factors and creating the job or a way of making money that actually supports that lifestyle that you envision for yourself rather than waiting. And people say, people focus on retiring from, but they don't focus on retire. What are you retiring to? And I think that's very true. And the fact that you had that awareness early on, it's a testament to what you can achieve when you are attuned with that.
You said something at the top of the show about how um, we kind of know as a young child what we want to do, and then we kind of become that. So I think in your head, deep in your subconscious, even as you're growing up and you're going to school and you have all these influences in your life, in your heart, actually in your gut, in a very intuitive way, what what really fascinates you. And you mentioned the Indiana Jones thing, and that's a very flattering thing to say. But I think even as a kid, the things that I was drawn to were, the mystery of, the African jungle, the mystery of getting on a plane and, traveling to another continent and all those things. And so, yeah, I think some ways it's not really a conscious thing. I think as you start aspiring to create your own career path and make your own way, and that you don't have your path dictated by a company or a profession, but it's something that you aspire to do. So, like you said, it's not really a job after a while. It's you living out this life that you've idealized, and it's the best. It's super fun.
I believe it, and I'm sure this conversation will inspire somebody out there listening to it to give that extra nudge, that extra. Maybe I'll start doing this on the side, and it doesn't take you writing the full book. It took you to like start writing articles, start with something, and then do it and do it and do it, and then it just finds you. I mean, obviously you're an amazing writer, and no matter what you were writing about, people found you and offer, write about this, write about that, even if you didn't know about the subject, because the subject can be researched and you could become proficient in it. But good writing, you cannot, even if now there's AI. And so being in the technology world, I'm compelled to ask about your take on AI and how it's helping people. Or helping people is a way of like really perfect. I've received emails lately that from people that I know because been
Oh,
receiving emails for a while from these people. I say they don't write like that. I know they don't write like that. And so
yeah.
you spot it. It's a good thing because the content is better, but now we are getting into a point where we are going to know less and less about who's writing what we're reading.
Yeah, I have mixed emotions about AI because when I'm researching, it's a good tool if I ask a very specific question, I'll get a very specific answer. And I'll say this too. I mean, I'm working on a new book right now about the running boom of the 1970s, and AI has given me a lot of wrong answers. And so
Mhm.
it's not foolproof. But from a writing point of view, I mean, there's the school of thought that says, authors will be replaced because AI is so good and they can just, publisher can just give it, a topic and they can spit out a book. I think the difference is personal experience, and it informs everything you write. And even if you're not writing first person, um, who you are, what you're about, the words you choose are uniquely your own. And I don't think AI is smart enough yet, give it time to mimic that. So I feel like as long as John Grisham, there's only one John Grisham, I don't, and AI can't mimic him. It can try, but I don't think it's perfect. And I think it's the same for the way that I write. Um, I make some word choices or some story choices that come out of left field. Things that I don't even see coming. But when the inspiration hits you and you're able to use those and put them into a story, it feels uniquely your own. And I feel like that's something AI can't do. But I think for people writing their emails in their speeches, it's a great tool, I think, for people to use that. But at the same time, because not everybody is a writer, I'm not a doctor, I'm a writer. I mean, there are people who were doctors, but so, and I've been, blessed with this gift of writing, but at the same time, I would encourage people to spend a little time working on your skills. I mean, a lot of things that go into being a writer have nothing to do with creativity, things like punctuation and spelling. And that's just, basic common sense. Learn how to punctuate, learn how to spell. That's just that's just knowledge.
Mm. Oh, thank you. That's incredible perspective. I'm in the tech world, so we obviously are pushing technology, but I think it's just a tool in our toolbox. And if you learn to use it, it's just one more ingredient for the soup, as I like to call it. And you can use it, in measured ways, but definitely writing from your heart. I think people recognize it. Like I know I've written things and people have reached out at me because they say, I've read 10 articles and I can tell this one was not written by AI because you're
Yeah.
sharing this story and you're sprinkling your personal experience in what you're writing. And AI, to your point, cannot do that. Cannot sprinkle with personal experience. And I think that's a secret sauce.
That's a good way to put it, is the secret sauce. I might steal that from you. That's a good one.
Feel free. It would be an honor. It would be an honor. So, Martin, I know you have a new book you share with it. This is part of also why we have you on the show today. What can you share? May 20, that's around the corner, and we're going to make sure that we publish this episode right on time so that people can check it out. So, what can you
Good.
share about your new work?
Well, taking Midway, it's the battle after Pearl Harbor. Everybody knows about Pearl Harbor, but Midway was this great threat because we were weakened at Pearl Harbor, and Midway, if the Japanese had won that battle, they would have been in a position to make another strike on Oahu and the U.S. forces at the naval base in Pearl Harbor. So it was vital that we win this battle. And Midway gets its name because it's literally halfway midway across the ocean from San Francisco to Japan. So it's strategically it's very vital. But you have some great action figures in there. You have some great action moments. Three Japanese carriers are bombed and attacked by U.S. stuff, and U.S. dive bombers, and it's one of those narratives there that I really tried to introduce all those things about fast pace and first person, and that you are there, cinematic feeling, and it's one of those books that will just put you right, in the cockpit with the pilots. It's a lot of fun.
Well, I'm looking forward. I definitely I'm thinking I have a 14-year-old that loves to read, and so I'm going to introduce him to your books because he's reading about history in a compelling way. It's actually, you cannot beat that.
I appreciate. I mean, that's my goal. Is I want people to love history. I mean, the way that I love history, because good history is better than any, fiction narrative. It takes you into the moment. Some of the things that happen, you can't even make up. It's just amazing. So I'd be flattered if you let your 14-year-old read, because I feel like especially this book is a great introduction to history for a young reader.
Well, I definitely will buy it for sure and give it to him. So anything else? I know you have a lot of things going on. I like always to give an opportunity. Any other initiatives, anything else besides having a new book and this amazing series, body of work you have that you want to highlight for the
No,
audience?
you know, not really. I mean, it's like I'm also on the board of the USA Track and Field Foundation, and we raise money to help people train for the gold medal. And so if anybody is interested, go to our website, usatffoundation.org, and make a donation just to help train our Olympic athletes for the coming 2028 Olympics. So, and that's I'm a track nerd, so I've got my writing side and my track and field side. So it makes my day, because I also coach at the local high school. So I kind of split my day between the two things. It makes for a fun life.
Well, I have to say, you're probably one of the guests that I've seen I sense a huge alignment in your life with everything you're baking in, loving the track field. Now you're on the board and you can make a difference and impact. I mean, you're really a great example how you can create a life of things you're passionate about and that you can make great living off and that you can really have legacy. So it's been an honor to have you on the show. And I always have to end these interviews asking about what makes my guests tick. So you've said a few things, but if you have to say, in the times where you sometimes not so sure, like, am I doing the right thing? And you have to reconnect to truly who Martin is, what would that be?
Oh, I live about a half mile from a wilderness area, and I just go out and I either hike or I run the trails and just get my head together. And I always go out by myself because, you just got to let your thoughts wander and fix it. That's kind of what makes me tick. I think I do everything just so at some point so I can kind of lead the life I want to lead. And sometimes that means wandering down a narrow forest trail all by yourself to see, what's out there.
Well, you definitely joined the company of many, I say many, many that have said nature. So we shouldn't underestimate the power that nature and the outdoors have on our well-being as humans. That connection, definitely. The more we nurture it, the better we feel.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
Yeah. Well, Martin, thank you so much. I feel accomplished because I already heard your book. This is one of the first time that happened. So it's not like you have a new fan. I've been a fan, but now I connected some important dots. So thank you for being on Back to Basics. And I'm sure the audience is going to enjoy it as much as I did.
No, thanks so much for having me on. This was a blast. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And to all of you out there, thanks for listening. And until the new episode. Bye-bye. You've been listening to Back to Basics. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook. If you haven't yet, subscribe, rate, and review this podcast on Apple Podcast or any of your favorite streaming platforms. This is the best gift you can give us. Join me next week for another Back to Basics conversation. And if you want to find out about other exciting things I'm working on, visit leticialatino.com. Thank you, and until the next time.